The hull log began mid-sentence. That was the first thing Fleet Analyst Varathson noticed, not the transmission itself, not the ship designation, not even the timestamp that placed the recording 3 standard cycles before the fall of Kareth Station. Just the fact that whoever had activated the recorder hadn't bothered to start at the beginning, as if they already knew most of what they had to say wouldn't matter, as if they were only recording the part that would. Varathson set down the data shard, looked at the serial number stamped along its edge, cross-referenced it against the Conclave's registry of active vessels. The ship didn't exist, not decommissioned, not destroyed, not missing. Just absent from every record, every manifest, every deployment log the Conclave had maintained for the past 11 years. A warship the size of a small moon, and the galaxy had simply forgotten it was out there. She pressed play. The voice on the recording was human. She could tell immediately, not because of the language, but because of the breathing. Humans breathed differently when they were afraid. They didn't suppress it. The voice belonged to someone who was clearly terrified and had decided, apparently, that this was not a reason to stop talking. Ship's log, ISV Unconquered Sun, Commander Yara OC recording. We've been running dark for 19 months. Fuel situation is. A pause, something that might have been a laugh. Creative. Most of my crew haven't slept in what I'm choosing not to calculate. We just received the Conclave's general distress call, the one they sent to everyone. Another pause. We're the only ones who answered. Varathson had processed thousands of battle reports. She had cataloged the fall of 4-star systems in the past 8 months. She had watched with the clinical detachment her training demanded, as the Dravith sovereignty consumed everything in the outer corridors, every fleet, every fortress, every alliance the Conclave had spent 3 centuries building. Nothing in her training had prepared her for the particular weight of those 6 words. We're the only ones who answered. She told herself it was a translation artifact. Humans were known for dramatic phrasing. Their language was structurally biased toward emphasis. They couldn't help but make everything sound like the edge of a cliff. The Conclave still had 7 functional battle groups, 4 allied species with active military commitments. The Dravith advance was devastating, yes, but the situation was not, could not be, so far gone that the only response to a general distress signal was a single human ship that apparently didn't officially exist. She checked the timestamp again. The distress call had gone out 11 weeks ago. She pulled the response registry. 1 entry. ESV Unconquered Sun. Inbound. ETA at that time, 43 days. Varathson sat very still for a moment. Then she pulled every battle report filed in the last 11 weeks and began reading them in order from oldest to most recent, looking for the moment things had gotten bad enough that she had somehow missed this. It took her less than an hour to find it. It took considerably longer to accept what she was reading. The Conclave's 7th battle group had been destroyed at Kareth Station 9 weeks ago. The 6th, redirected to cover the evacuation corridor at Hethmira, had been functionally annihilated 3 weeks after that. The allied species, the Sorvani, the Quellan, the twin-brained archivists of Pelham, had each, in their own diplomatic language, found reasons why their military commitments required immediate reassessment. The Dravith sovereignty had not paused to allow for reassessment. They had advanced through the reassessment. What remained of the Conclave's military capacity was, by the most generous calculation Varathson could construct, 16% of what it had been a year ago. The recording was still playing. She'd let it run without listening. She tuned back in. The Dravith don't understand what they're looking at, Commander Osei was saying. That's the part my crew keeps arguing about. Half of them think it's a liability. The other half think it's the only thing we have worth using. Her voice shifted, slightly rougher. I think they're both right. Varathson rewound. Played that section again. The Dravith don't understand what they're looking at. What did that mean? What was the unconquered sun showing the Dravith that they were misreading? And why would one human warship, One ship, running dark, with a crew that hadn't slept properly in over a year. Why would they consider themselves a meaningful variable in a war that had already consumed dozens of battle groups from 6 species? She moved to the next file in the data shard. It was not another log entry. It was a Dravith internal communication. Intercepted, translated, filed, and then apparently buried in the Conclave's intelligence backlog without anyone senior ever reading it. The communication was flagged as low priority. The subject header, translated, read anomalous contact, unknown vessel class, recommend monitoring. It was dated 7 weeks ago. 7 weeks ago, when the unconquered sun should still have been 8 days out from any Dravith contact. Varathson's mandibles pressed flat against her jaw. She opened the communication and began reading, and somewhere in the 3rd paragraph, she stopped breathing. The Dravith sovereignty had encountered the unconquered sun for the first time at the ruins of Kareth Station. They had not expected to encounter anything at Kareth Station. Kareth Station was a graveyard. The sovereignty's own advance had reduced it to debris and radiation, and they had moved on because the Dravith did not linger near things they had already broken. There was no tactical reason to. Which was apparently why they hadn't anticipated finding a human warship parked directly in the debris field, completely unpowered, running no emissions, drawing no energy signature whatsoever. The Sovereignty's scout element had nearly collided with it. They'd brought their sensors to maximum resolution and still couldn't get a clean reading. The debris of Kareth Station scattered everything, and the unconquered sun wasn't helping them by being detectable. The scout commander had filed the encounter as a derelict, an abandoned ship from the battle, probably crew dead, drifting. They'd moved on. 2 days later, a Dravith supply convoy passing through the same corridor had been hit from behind by weapons fire that their sensors couldn't trace back to any active vessel. By the time they'd recalibrated and identified the source, the unconquered sun was back in the debris field, unpowered, still, drifting exactly as a derelict would drift. The convoy commander had filed the incident as a sensor malfunction. 1 more day, another strike, different approach vector, same disappearance. The Dravith internal communication ended with a line that Varathson read 3 times before she fully processed it. We have lost 6 vessels to a ship our instruments cannot confirm is operational. Request clarification on whether Conclave forces have developed a new stealth capability or whether human crew are somehow surviving zero-power conditions we would consider lethal. Varathson set the file down. Surviving zero-power conditions we would consider lethal. She found Commander Osei's next log entry filed 16 hours after the Dravith communication. We've started calling it the Coal. Osei's voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. Not fear exactly. Something that had moved past fear into a place Varathson didn't have a word for in her language. Full shutdown. No life support, no heat regulation, no active systems. We're running on reserve battery for the recorder and nothing else. Crew is in thermal suits, grouped for body heat. A pause. The Dravith keep assuming a dead ship is actually dead. A beat of silence. They're not wrong that it's dangerous. Lost in Sign Tarka 2 nights ago. Hypothermia. He was 23. Her voice didn't break, but it changed, compressed itself into something harder and smaller. We logged it. We kept running the cold. Their son sat with that for a long moment. They had lost a crew member to their own tactic, and they had continued using the tactic. She thought about the Dravith communication, marked low priority, sitting unread for weeks. She thought about the fleet analyst who should have caught it and hadn't because no one had been looking for evidence that a single human warship was slowly dismantling Dravith supply lines through a strategy that required enduring conditions that could kill them. No one had been looking because no one had known the unconquered sun was there. No one had known because she pulled the registry again, checked it again. The ship had been removed from active records 11 years ago following a conclave audit of military expenditure. It had been classified as non-mission capable pending refit. The refit had never been funded. The crew had never been formally reassigned. The ship had simply continued to exist in the way things that fall through administrative gaps continue to exist, maintained by a skeleton crew on a hull that the Conclave had forgotten to either repair or decommission. 11 years. How long have you been out there? The Wrath Sun said aloud to no one. Then she found the crew manifest, cross-referenced it against the Conclave's personnel registry. The Unconquered Sun was carrying a crew of 412. Of those 412, she found active personnel files for 37. The rest were flagged as discharged, retired, or, in 19 cases, officially deceased. People the military had stopped paying. People the military had, on paper, let go. People who were still on that ship. "Why are you still there?" she said. The next Dravith communication in the Shard was not flagged low priority. It was flagged with the sovereignty's equivalent of a maximum urgency marker, a classification Varathson had seen exactly twice in her career, both times in the immediate aftermath of major Conclave fleet actions. It was dated 4 weeks ago, and it wasn't a field report. It was a direct communication from a Dravith War Master, the 6th rank in their command hierarchy, a level of authority that did not personally file operational reports under any circumstances Varathson was familiar with. The subject line read, "Regarding the human vessel, mandatory review." She opened it. The first paragraph established facts. The Unconquered Sun had, in the preceding 3 weeks, destroyed or disabled 22 Dravith vessels. It had done so without ever appearing by Dravith sensor readings to be an active combatant. It had disrupted 3 major supply operations. It had forced the sovereignty to divert a full combat wing to escort duty for convoys that would otherwise have moved freely, a diversion that had, the communication noted with a bitterness Varathson could read through the translated text, materially slowed their advance on the Conclave's remaining defensive positions. 1 ship. The second paragraph was shorter. This vessel should not be capable of continued operation. Our intelligence suggests the crew is subsisting on emergency rations with no resupply. Their power systems should be critically depleted. They have sustained hull damage across multiple engagements. By every metric available to us, they should have retreated, surrendered, or died. They have done none of these things. They have instead become more aggressive. The final paragraph was 3 sentences. We dispatched a dedicated hunter-killer squadron to eliminate the vessel. The squadron located the vessel in a debris field. The squadron did not return. Varathson pushed back from her console, stood up, walked to the far wall of her analysis bay, turned around and walked back, sat down. More aggressive. She found OC's log from the same period, 31 days ago. The voice on the recording was harder to hear now. Not quieter exactly, but stripped down to something purely functional. The warmth from the early entries was still there, but it had been compressed, like metal under pressure. Dravith Hunter-Killer Squadron came for us 12 hours ago. 7 ships, coordinated. They knew what they were doing. A breath. We let them get into the debris field. Then Lieutenant Mangi took the Sun through a section of the field we've been mapping for 2 weeks. They hadn't mapped it. They couldn't follow without losing formation. A pause. Mangi has a fractured wrist from the maneuvering. She did it anyway. Another pause. Longer. Crew vote this morning. 73% in favor of continuing engagement rather than retreating to resupply. That's not an order I gave. That's not a number I requested. Something shifted in her voice. Not pride, exactly. Something older than pride. I keep thinking about what they're voting for, what they know they're voting for, and the recording cut out for 4 seconds. We're going back in. The data shard contained 47 more files. Vareth's son had been in her analysis bay for 6 hours. She had not eaten. She had not reported to her supervisor. She had done none of the things her daily schedule required because she could not stop reading, because every file she opened changed something she thought she understood. The unconquered son had not been operating a simple guerrilla strategy. She could see that now, looking at the engagement records laid out in sequence. Osei had been systematically identifying which supply lines fed the Dravith Advance directly versus which were redundant, versus which served primarily as logistical confidence infrastructure, the routes the sovereignty needed not because they were essential, but because their absence would signal vulnerability. She had been hitting those last, not the critical arteries, the confidence lines, forcing the sovereignty to question whether the war was going as well as they believed. She's not trying to stop them, Vareth murmured. She's trying to make them uncertain. One ship, unauthorized, forgotten, running on emergency rations and crew body heat and a strategy that required them to survive conditions designed to kill them, making a galactic conquering force uncertain. The final log entry was dated 9 days ago. Osei's voice had changed entirely, still functional, still controlled. But there was something in the pauses now, a weight that hadn't been there in the beginning. Hull breach in Section 7, sealed it, lost the aft observation deck. 17 crew and medical with radiation exposure. The deck wasn't fully cleared before we used the emergency seal procedure. She stopped. That's on me. A silence that stretched long enough that Vareth's wondered if the recording had cut out again. The Dravith Advance on the Barath corridor has stopped. Not reversed. Stopped. Holding position. I don't know if that's us or something else or coincidence, but they've stopped. Another pause. I'm choosing to believe it matters. A breath. Crew is down to 319 operational. Fuel for approximately 11 more days of maneuvering at current consumption. We have enough ammunition for 4, maybe 5 more significant engagements before we're reduced to whatever we can rig from the hull. Her voice shifted, something almost gentle entering it. My people keep asking me what the plan is after that. A very long pause. I keep telling them we'll figure it out. Vareth had been sitting with the last entry for almost an hour when her console chimed. Incoming contact. She routed it to her station on reflex. The channel identifier resolved. ISV, Unconquered Sun, live signal. Currently in the Vareth corridor, 40,000 kilometers from the nearest conclave station. She opened the channel. Static. Then breathing. This is Commander Yara Osei of the Unconquered Sun, requesting docking authorization and emergency resupply. A pause. I should warn you, we're going to need a lot of both. Vareth opened her mouth. Closed it. Tried 3 different formal responses and abandoned all of them. Commander Osei, I'm Fleet Analyst Vareth. I've been reviewing your ship logs. How far did you get? All the way. A pause from Osei's end. Something that might have been the ghost of a laugh. Then you know we're not exactly what the conclave ordered. No, Vareth said. You're not. She looked at the crew manifest on her screen. The 19 names flagged deceased. The 319 operational, and everything that word operational was working very hard not to say about the ones who weren't. I have to ask you something. Go ahead. Why did you come back? The conclave forgot you existed. Your crew isn't being paid. You have crew members officially listed as dead who are alive on your ship. You have been running without authorization, without resupply, without support for 11 years. When the distress call went out, Vareth paused, trying to frame a question that encompassed what she was actually asking. You didn't have to answer it. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that she thought the channel had dropped. Then Osei said, very quietly, Analyst, where else were we going to go? The Dravith sovereignty's advance on the Vareth corridor did not resume. Not that day, not the next. Not in the weeks that followed, when the conclave, finally, belatedly, with the urgency of an institution that had just discovered how close to the edge it had drifted, began the process of formally reactivating the unconquered sun, reinstating her crew, addressing the 19 names that should never have been marked deceased in the first place. The Dravith had stopped moving because they couldn't resolve a tactical question that should have been simple. What do you do about an enemy that refuses to recognize the conditions under which it's supposed to stop fighting? Varath's Sun filed her analysis report on the unconquered sun at 4 in the morning, 6 days after she'd first found the data shard. Her supervisor would later describe it as the most unusual document ever submitted to the Conclave's Intelligence Division, not for its conclusions, but for its final line. She'd never explained it to his satisfaction. The line read, "The Dravit sovereignty made a single critical strategic error. They assume that a civilization fights until it calculates that it cannot win. They did not account for the possibility of a crew that had been forgotten by their own government for 11 years and had chosen to come back anyway." She'd stared at that line for a long time before submitting it. Then she'd added one more sentence beneath it. The question we should be asking is not what made the unconquered sun effective. The question is, what kind of species produces people who, after 11 years of institutional abandonment, answer a distress call without hesitation, and when asked why, cannot understand why the question is being asked? She still didn't have a complete answer. She suspected the Dravit sovereignty team didn't either. And in a war that had consumed 4 star systems and the better part of a galactic coalition, that uncertainty, planted by 319 people on a forgotten ship, running dark and cold in a debris field, with enough ammunition for 5 more engagements and a plan they were still figuring out, had been enough. For now. Just barely. For now.